Hi there, this video is about the first 2, 3, 4 minutes of the consultation, and I think it may be the most important section to get right. My suggestions in this video, if you can follow them, should make the consultation easier because it makes it simpler and will gain more. The aim of the first few minutes of the consultation is to understand as well as you can what's been happening with the patient, so their symptoms, the impact on their life, their health beliefs, what they think is going on, and their purpose for the consultation. Why are they here? And that's your aim in the first few minutes before you start going into closed questions. There's a few principles which sort of back up your aims and how to go about this. So first would be, so obviously your aim is to work out about symptoms, effect on their life and their health beliefs. Second, try to imagine you are the patient, or try to imagine the patient in their own home and how it affects them. So they're not a patient that's sat in your consulting room with you or on the ward or in the emergency department. When they're talking to you, try and imagine either what that would be like or project them in their life to try and really get an idea of what's happening. Patients plan what they're going to say. So as soon as they've made an appointment with you, or while they're waiting to see you in the waiting room or an emergency department, wherever it may be, unless they're very ill, they'll be sitting there thinking about all the symptoms they've had and how they're going to say it and what they're going to say. So give them time, allow them to speak for as long as possible. Next thing, there are hundreds of symptoms and other bits of evidence that a patient may have. You don't know anything about the patient before the start of the consultation. There are 1,000 things that could happen. You can't possibly guess what those might be with closed questions. You could ask 100 closed questions to be able to get a picture of what's going on. It's just not feasible. It takes ages. Do not ask closed questions until you really have to, right at the end, to clarify certain bits of the consultation. Ask the patient to tell you what is going on with them. So no closed questions early on. Most patients won't be able to tell you everything in one go. They will manage some, and then they will stop, and they will either need a bit of time to think or need some encouragement to continue. So don't just give them one chance to say everything. If you try to think, tell me everything about a tree, you might tell me about some stuff, and then if I said, tell me a bit more, what else can you think of about a tree? You'd think of a load of other stuff about a tree. So give patients a chance to tell you everything, and not just one chance. The other thing is that you can't possibly listen properly to what the patient's saying and try to understand what's happening, what the symptoms are like for them, what are they trying to tell you, if you're also trying to think of the next question to ask. So do not try to think of the next question. Listen properly, make mental notes of things you might want to clarify or things you might want to make to bring up later, but do not be thinking of the next question to ask. Listen properly. There is loads of evidence on consultation skills and how to consult well. That includes the fact that most doctors, especially when they're in training, will worry about letting patients talk for too long because they think the consultation will last longer if they do. Now, evidence is when you let patients talk, they rarely talk for much more than a minute. 2 minutes is between 1 to 2 minutes is about average. Very rarely do patients talk for more than 3 minutes. If during that time you start talking and interrupt, you will probably send the consultation in the wrong direction. Allowing patients to talk actually reduces consultation time because you get the right information. You no longer go down the wrong avenue or have to spend lots of time with closed questions. And it increases patient satisfaction. Patients feel more satisfied if they're listened to. There is also evidence about how to go about this. So you would always start with an open question, and that's pretty obvious. So a question like, how can I help you today, is pretty standard. You might have one that you prefer. It's worth being aware of the implication of what you're saying is, but generally something along that line works well for most people. Now, really good evidence that while the patient is talking early on in the consultation, that you do nothing to try and distract that train of thought. So if you're face to face, then the non-verbal communication, the sitting forward, looking interested, nodding, making the right facial expressions at the right time, looking happy and sad or concerned, and making the sounds that says, I'm listening and I'm interested. Yes. Oh, okay. Right. Okay. Right. That's all you need to do. Really good evidence that if you say any more than that, you will distract where the patient's going from. So it's not unusual for a doctor to try and sort of gain more rapport and sound interested by making an empathic statement. So the patient started telling you about some pain, and you said, oh, that sounds really bad, you having that pain. They might start telling you about the pain, where actually the consultation wasn't necessarily about the pain. They've got that dealt with. But what they were going to do was something else further on that's happened. So allow the patient to unveil their story without directing them down an avenue too early. So the other thing was just give them, if a patient pauses, give them a chance to speak again. Just because they're paused and they're having a think doesn't mean you have to jump in. It doesn't mean that they're finished. So give them a pause. If it looks obvious, if the pause goes on too long, or they look to you suggesting that with their non-verbal communication that they're finished, then that's the point to move on and facilitate the next stage. But give them a pause if you can. So you've got to that point where they've paused, they've looked at you to say, your turn next. Your decision, you've got A or B here. Okay, and that's the reason why you don't want to pre-plan your question. A or B. Have you got enough information to move on to the next stage of the consultation, so you've kind of got a fair idea of what you're dealing with and the impact, that kind of thing? Or B, you don't have enough information, you don't really understand what's going on. So if that's the case, you want to facilitate a more open continuation of the patient's kind of journey through this condition. Now, way I probably go, so I would say that's the common. The more common is to not have enough information yet when the patient first stops talking. So you're usually going to go down that route. Now, the way I usually do it, so my most common would be to look at the timeline. And I will do a separate video on this because I think it's really important, but I may ask something along the lines of, so can you tell me exactly when it first started? Take me back to the start. Tell me when exactly it first started and what sort of symptoms you had at that point. And then I will facilitate finding out the timeline of symptoms going through from the start through to now. The other way is to just facilitate more talking. Now, exactly what you say will then determine what line the patient will go down. If the patient's hardly told you anything, they've given you a kind of opening statement, and maybe they're embarrassed, or they don't have the confidence to tell you more, you don't want to limit it down. So you might ask a totally open question. Can you tell me a bit more about it? Or can you tell me a bit more about this? Something like that. And then you're not limiting down, you're saying, you tell me what you want me to say, what you want to say to me. If you've got a fair amount of information but you need more, you may want to specify which area you're going to go down. So with the disease illness model, if you want to know more about the disease, you might say, tell me a bit more about your symptoms. Something like that. And then you're going to be specifically asking an open question, but it's open but directed towards the symptoms. If it's more emotional or the impact of the illness, then an empathic statement works quite well. Now with this, you just make the statement and then you pause and then you allow the patient to say the next bit. They fill in the gap. You don't need to give the empathic statement and then say another question. So again, it's another example where you're making it easier on yourself. If you want to know more about the emotional side of things, you could say, that sounds really tough. That's all you need to say, and then the patient will tell you how and why it's tough. If you want to know about the impact on their life, you could say, this pain sounds like it's really having an impact on your life. That's all you need to say, because then the patient will tell you about how and why it's having an impact on their life. So those are a couple of different ways of facilitating more information. If you feel you've mostly got enough information, you don't need to do timeline or find out more, then generally there are two ways I would go next. One would be if there's a certain symptom or thing that you feel you really need to clarify. Now, this isn't an excuse to ask a series of closed questions, but it's just something that would make a massive difference to the consultation. So, for example, if the patient had been referring to when they go to the toilet, you might want to clarify, when you said about going to the toilet, are you referring to opening your bowels or passing urine? If the person is talking about dizziness, you might want to clarify whether this is a vertigo or postural hypertension or a kind of brain fog type condition they're referring to. So it might be something very specific, but don't then lead that down a series of closed questions. You clarify your point and then you come back to the open question. And then either the next thing, or if you didn't need to do that, would be to go to the ICE questions. And obviously I'm going to do a load more videos about ICE stuff, but a question such as, did you have any thoughts about why this all started, would be the next question I would generally go to. Now, a lot of you might think of ICE questions as something not related to the data gathering, but more about how the patient feels about their condition. Whereas actually, why the patient thinks they've got this and what they think it is could be some of the most important data gathering you get. Exactly what they think has happened may be the answer to the questions you were going to ask later on. So definitely ask this after you've got as much open information initially as you can. Okay, quite a long video there. I hope it makes sense. And like I said, there'll be more videos around more of these topics later on. Thank you.